What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of The Force Sensitive. This is episode 5. This is supposed to be a classic, remembered for years and years and years. We're following the Star Wars tradition. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out. I got my co-host with me. I got Gort in the house.
Hey, how's it going?
And we have our guest, Michael, who you may not know from anywhere because he's a friend of Gort's. But that's the beauty of this show, is introducing new voices and new perspectives into kind of the little niche we've carved out for ourselves. So, Michael, how are you?
I'm fine. How about yourself?
Quite well. Quite well. Booked and busy, you know what I mean? But quite well.
Yeah.
So let's just get right into it. What is your first memory of Star Wars?
So my first memory of Star Wars would be when I was living in Kentucky the first time, and my parents had the VHSs of Star Wars, the old black box where all 3 VHSs were in, and watching them nonstop, and my oldest sister complaining to me that I watch Star Wars too much.
Mm-hmm. What age and year do you think this is?
Oh, let's see here. So that would be probably around like 1994, 1995.
Okay, so
about 6 or 7 years old.
A little later in the game than us. And how was it love at first sight, or was there any sort of like growing into it, or how did that?
So I think being a kid, still like 6 or 7 years old, and this is going to sound really funny, my favorite episode was probably Return of the Jedi, because, little fluffy things.
And fun,
really,
fun creatures.
Yes, that's what really got me into Star Wars. And then as I got older, I started to appreciate the other 2 films, and then, the prequels came out, and then it kind of just got even more of an obsession from there.
Did you see the Ewok movies as a kid?
I did not see the Ewok movies as a kid.
That's a bummer, since you were kind of into them.
Yum.
Yeah, yum.
And then Gordon has always told me to avoid the Christmas special, so I've never even watched it.
So it's funny. I've never watched it either. I've never watched it either. Yep, it's a fact. I've never watched it either.
I have sat through that whole thing more than once. It is an atrocity. And one of my good friends, he used to do it annually. Like, that was a tradition for him, and I don't know how he could stomach it, but it's rough.
What speaking of the Ewoks, I had this little thing when I was a kid. It just came to me like in a memory. It was like this, I don't know. They were an '80s play toy that, they had them for tons of franchises. I just happened to have an Ewok one that I think was based on the Ewok cartoon that I also never saw. I never saw droids either. But it was like a green circle, and at the center of the green circle was a cylindrical tube that connected to a smaller green circle. And you would sit with your legs around this tube in like kind of Indian style, or what my kids call crisscross applesauce or pretzel style. And you would spin it by spinning the top circle, and it would spin the bottom circle. And it was like a carousel almost, but like a single player unit. Do you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I had one with the Ewoks. I'm going to have to find a picture of it. I might use it as a thumbnail for something. But that's like my biggest memory of the Ewoks as a kid. Like, was that I played on that thing all the time, for better or worse. So it's a bizarre thing for a child to just be like sitting in the corner spinning himself, if you like think about it kind of in hindsight. But anyway, neither here nor there. So you're watching these films during the kind of Kenner transition to Hasbro, Power of the Force stuff. Did you get into any of that stuff as a kid, being as though you're being introduced to them and the toys are readily available?
No, well, because I grew up in that, that 90s era. I love Star Wars. What really started taking over my world as toys was probably Pokemon. So
right.
No offense, Star Wars, but Pokemon kind of dominated my life next to Star Wars as a kid.
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. My kids are super into it also. I learned about all the legendary ones recently. They give me little breakdowns. So you never really became a collector of Star Wars stuff as throughout your life, or just when you were a kid?
Probably not as a kid. I have some stuff now. Like I read some of the new canon, like with Thrawn and all that stuff. So I have the books. I have some of the figurines that have come with my video games. So like, Gort and I both played the Old Republic, and I still have my Malgus statue sitting next to my computer.
Oh,
so
as do I.
I have stuff like that. But as for going out and buying toys and stuff. Probably not so much. I have random Star Wars shirts. So like when I get dress down days at school, because I'm a teacher, I'll wear my periodic table shirt of Star Wars villains just to make my kids laugh. So
I got you.
that gets a little rise out of them.
So it wasn't too long after you got that's kind of an interesting perspective for me to like contemplate, that it's like it's not too long after you see the original trilogy that like the prequels are just lined up waiting for you to consume as well.
Right.
That's bizarre. That's bizarre for me, where there's like this like 20-year gap.
Right.
I wonder there's no way for me to even know it. There's no way for you to even articulate it, I don't think, for me to really understand what that was like to just have this like constant bombardment of 6 Star Wars films in the first 10 years of your life. But
well, I think it's interesting because my parents were teenagers when the first Star Wars movies came out. So I think my dad really enjoyed how reasonably excited I was to see the prequel movies. I was like 10, so I wanted to see, 10, 13 years old, and wanted to go see a prequel movie. He's like, I've been waiting 30 years for these things. He was excited that I wanted to see them. So I think that's what even made me love Star Wars even more, is the fact that my dad loved Star Wars when I was a teenager. He's like, yeah, let's go. It's like the first time I've ever seen him like gung-ho to go see a movie with me.
So as a 10-year-old, how does The Phantom Menace sit with you upon first watching?
So when I saw it as a 10-year-old, I absolutely loved it, because I was like, man, I finally get to see Star Wars on the big screen. That was I loved seeing everything on the big. I loved Darth Maul as a villain.
Right.
I loved seeing, because when you watch A New Hope and you watch the lightsaber battles, like the lightsaber fades out on the screen because it's old school CGI. But actually seeing like lightsaber battles, so the lightsaber stays the entire time, better choreographed fights because the acting's better. I loved it. I loved every second of it as a kid.
How did Jar Jar sit with you as a 10-year-old?
I hated Jar Jar from the get-go.
Really? See, because I mean,
he annoyed the living daylights out of me.
Because I mean, unfortunately, like you're kind of, you're where that net was cast. You know what I'm saying? Right. And it didn't resonate with you. And I mean, dude, I've talked about it a little bit on the show before, how the kind of extent I've gone to kind of explain that character in my head canon throughout my fandom. But I do find it interesting, like just the overwhelming amount of merchandise and marketing and everything else that went into that character to kind of capture your demographic, and it totally missed. And instead, what appealed to you was the same thing that appealed to me in that marketing, which was Maul.
Right.
Huh.
And I think what's really interesting, is where I get into the Clone Wars show, is I feel like that, that Cartoon Network Clone Wars show actually kind of painted Jar Jar in a more reasonable light than the movies actually did. It's like, oh, okay, so he's not as annoying. He's actually doing things for a purpose. He's still clumsy and goofy, but he is actually, and I guess that's a benefit of having a 6-season-long TV show, is that you can develop a character more than a 2.5-hour movie can.
Well, he also like, he seems culturally like independent from the rest of the Gungans, even in the Phantom Menace. He seems like an idiot by their standards.
Right.
I mean,
but then
would you agree, Gort?
Yeah. I think that he's definitely like the buffoon of his people, but something that made him easier to digest in the show, he was definitely not liked by his peers. Like 3PO had no interest in this character, right. And the Jedi, Mace Windu, he had to team up with him at one point later in the series, and Mace just was not having it. But I feel like that's kind of fun. Like the other characters are kind of like the viewer. Like we all just don't like this guy.
Huh. I mean, let's be honest though. Seeing him imitate being a Jedi was amusing on multiple levels.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah. So then the next thing for you would be the Attack of the Clones.
Yes.
So let me set this up a little bit, because we started hearing around that time about George Lucas has ruined my childhood, and any other kind of cliche that would have been a meme at that time, had memes been a thing. But did you feel any kind of way about that? Were you at all disenfranchised by the character that you didn't care for, or what have you in Phantom Menace?
I think it's interesting to make a time, and this is the one thing I actually kind of like about the prequel movies as opposed to the newer trilogy story coming out. I appreciate the time skips between the movies. Like I think that it opens up a lot of possibilities for you to do stuff with the story between the movies.
Right.
And it was very interesting to see Hayden Christensen jump into the role of Anakin. And I think there were parts of, you get the giddy, childish excitement of young boy Anakin wanting to become a Jedi, and then you transition to Hayden Christensen of, I'm showing no emotion because I'm trying to be a Jedi and I hate sand. And
Right.
I think when The Phantom Menace came out, I was a teenager, so I was a lot more critical of things that I saw, and that's when I would say the first probably hour of that movie bored the living daylights out of me. It did. And it wasn't until they got to Geonosis and the clone troopers showed up, I was like, oh yeah, here we go.
Right.
Clone troopers, we're getting battle scenes like this. This is awesome. That I think it was for a movie that was focusing on the beginning of the Clone Wars, waiting for the last 40 minutes for the Clone Wars to start was kind of like, man, I just sat through an hour and a half of, again, political drama with the Jedi and who everybody knew was going to be Darth Sidious because, Ian McDermott,
Right.
He's going to be Darth Sidious. And it's like, just get to the point. And I think that's what started to annoy me, because that's when I really started to pick up Star Wars books and read more about Star Wars. It was probably right after The Phantom Menace.
Well,
because I still really enjoyed The Phantom Menace.
Right. So it is interesting that, like, between 1 and 2, to kind of go to your point, like, that's the biggest time jump between any film inside of its own trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's also kind of like between 1 and 2 specifically is kind of like the least interesting period. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
in terms of like expanded universe stuff, in terms of, extracurricular modern canon that kind of fits in that pocket. It's like, for instance, like I don't know, is it 4 or 5 years between 2 and 3? And like, because of the Clone Wars, like that era is like, immensely more interesting. Whereas between 1 and 2, it kind of goes to the point that a lot of people make regarding Phantom Menace, that it should have started, much closer to episode 2 in terms of time than it did.
Quick question. Now, I thought that the gap between episode 2 and 3 was just 3 years. Is that something that might have been retconned?
Oh, I don't. I was just taking a shot in the wind. I said 4 to 5. Like you said 3.
Oh, okay.
That's close. I'll go with 3.
At least it's not like 20 minutes between, episodes 7 and 8, where it's like, oh shit, here's a 20-minute time jump.
Yeah. Well, so like, but that's the thing where, like, I find that interesting for the same reason almost. You know what I mean? Because it's the closest of any between 2. It's
right.
like I don't know. I mean, it's a bizarre reference to bring up, but like, I remember watching Karate Kid 2 as a kid, and I was like, oh my god, it's picking up right after the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I always thought that was cool, because you don't really see that in any sequel ever, where it's like, it's you leave on the left foot and you land on the right foot,
Right.
But anyway, back on target. How was your reaction? We always ask this. How was your reaction to the Yoda and lightsaber? And how old are you at 2002?
So 2002, I'm now 14 years old. So,
okay.
Gort and I have talked about this immensely. Puppet Yoda versus CGI Yoda. I think the CGI model of Yoda in episode 1 was awful. And I think they did a lot of work in episode 2 to make the CGI model look more closely related to Puppet Yoda. So it was awesome to see Yoda fighting a lightsaber battle against, Dooku. But it felt really exaggerated. Even as a 14-year-old, it was like, why? Flips, it was nuts. And if I remember correctly, I found myself laughing as much as I was excited at watching that scene, because it was completely absurd at the same time. It was like amazing and absurd to see like a 1.5 foot tall being doing flips and stuff off of buildings and, ships and craziness.
Yeah, I find that sequence really, like, it either it really lands for people or it doesn't. And like, for some reason, dude, even today, like, and watching something on your phone is like a completely different experience than cinematically. You know what I mean?
Right.
But like, even on my phone when I watch it, I'm like, dude, this is cool. Like, I don't know what it is about it for me, but it's like, it still works on some level for me.
I think it's really cool because, I enjoyed the scene. I think would have made it better for me is if you didn't do that like weird yell as you started like going in a
that is Gort's favorite part. That's Gort's favorite part.
That's the part that kind of just makes me start cracking up when that happens.
We got to get that on the soundboard.
Even when 2002, that CGI still holds up. Even
100%.
2019. I mean, it shows you that George Lucas his CGI firm kind of does a heck of a job with stuff like that.
Well, and I mean, not for nothing. If you look at that CGI model in episode 2 and compare it against the practical puppet in episode 1, it destroys it.
Mm-hmm.
That puppet was trash.
It was so bad.
It's like
it didn't look like Yoda.
It didn't.
I think it's so bad that when they released the new DVD set where you can get episodes 1 through 6, didn't they go over and get rid of that puppet in episode 1?
Which was the better choice.
Yeah.
It looks like something out of Dark Crystal. It doesn't.
Yeah, I was about to say that. It looks like a Skedis.
Okay, so then we have this, and I know you're a Clone Wars fan, so we're definitely going to dig into that at some point. But we're going to try to go chronologically. The first exposure to any sort of animated representation of the Clone Wars was those short segments that came out before Episode 3. That was on, what was it, Cartoon Network that it was on?
Yeah, I think so.
What did you think about those? We haven't talked too much about those on this show.
I actually didn't like those.
Dude, I don't like them either. I feel like I'm the only one.
Really
yeah. Yeah, I don't care for them. I think they're fine. And like I've said this before, like Star Wars is a lot like pizza to me. Like it only tastes so bad. But like it's definitely something that I tend to like just ignore. Like it never really landed for me. The only thing I thought was cool about it was you get to see Grievous's chest get crushed, which explains the cough, because I always thought the cough was obnoxious.
Right.
But yeah, I never cared for it either. What was your talk a little bit more about your feelings seeing it and thoughts surrounding it?
So I just, for being somebody who liked animated stuff, I thought the artistic style they chose for those shows wasn't the best. And that's what really just kind of put me off about it. It's not even that I didn't like what was going on. Like, I appreciated the stories that were being told. It's just that, like, aesthetically wise, that the choices there didn't really resonate with me that well. Because then you go and you look at the actual Clone Wars cartoon, and it looks way better than those little shorts did. I mean, way better.
I agree. I have to also say there's obviously an element of subjectivity to that, right? Like that Samurai Jack, that's the style, right? Like and like that's like for some people that's like the creme de la creme or whatever. Like that's their favorite stuff in the world. I agree with you. I'm not crazy about it either aesthetically, but also, to be fair, it took me a while to dig into Clone Wars because I was turned off by the aesthetics at first as well. It's the same, to be fair, the same thing with Rebels. Like, I much prefer, I guess more anime style than how exaggerated the faces were. And to be fair, all of those animated shows, have super exaggerated, facial designs.
Once in Rebels, you got the elongated, skinny body form too. Like it was almost, it was kind of weird. Like they were super. Like Maul looked like he lost like 20 pounds, but gained 8 feet in height almost, which is really strange.
Yeah.
But in Rebels, they seem to have normalized the faces, but they also simplified all the designs too, like the textures and everything.
Well, yeah, but I think they normalized. Like I think that like Hera looks like, ironically enough, looks one of the more realistic. Whereas I feel like Ezra definitely feels super kind of cartoony, exaggerated.
He looks like he's about to go rub a magic lamp.
He does. He looks a lot like Aladdin. That's for sure. So okay, let's get into episode 3 now. Before we launch into that movie, where is your kind of feelings surrounding the prequel trilogy unfolding so far? Like, how are you feeling about it?
So I'm definitely still enjoying them. They aren't anything that's like earth-shatteringly bad yet, or anything bad. I'm enjoying the story. I'm enjoying the build-up to the inevitable Darth Sidious reveal, and keep talking to my dad about how Chancellor Palpatine is Darth Sidious. I mean, come on, you should have known from episode 1. especially since Ian McDermott was recast as the role. I mean, come on, he was Darth Sidious. He's going to be Darth Sidious.
Right.
And I think I always had a problem with Hayden Christensen's portrayal of Anakin, but that's changed in recent years. Actually, in about a year or two, that's changed a little bit. But as for me, I've still really enjoyed the prequel movies so far, and there's nothing like that would make me still not love Star Wars. So if that makes sense.
So are you excited? Are you excited that it's coming?
Fun story. We had just moved to New Jersey. This is still way before I had met Gort. But we just moved to New Jersey. We had just left Ohio, and we got midnight showing tickets to episode 3. My dad and I did, because at the time we thought, man, it's the last Star Wars movie. Go out with a bang, go at midnight. You know, we got to go midnight on release night. Even if it's the last one, we got to go. And so I was reasonably excited. I remember this is going to go off topic a little bit. My sister, before we had moved, was dating somebody named Luke. And so for my birthday, my parents had given me the tickets for the midnight showing for my dad and I, and it said "From Luke" on there. And I was like, huh. I looked at my parents and said, why is Jen's ex-boyfriend giving me movie tickets to go see Star Wars? My dad's like, you're an idiot. They're from Luke Skywalker. It's like, Luke Skywalker's it was. And that shouldn't surprise Gort at all about me, like, just missing blatant obvious stuff that's like right in front of my face. But yeah, I was really, really excited for episode 3. And if I remember right, because I think I was a sophomore in high school. I was the only one of my group of friends that was going to go see it at midnight, and then one of my friends decided to go at the last second. I remember telling them, "You can't tell anybody about it because you didn't have plans. I'm the one that gets to talk about it." Like, I was that excited about going to see it at midnight. That's
awesome. I have 2 things to interject real quick. One, just on on your, everybody's going to know this is Darth Sidious. And I felt the same way. I was also surprised at how many kind of casual fans had no clue. And also, I remember watching episode 3 with my daughter for the first time, my oldest daughter, who was probably 9 at the time. And when Palpatine was on his back getting electrocuted and face warped, as that face started to change and then Anakin came into the room, I remember my 9-year-old like turning around like, oh my God, I know how this is going to play out. Like, like it all clicked for her at that one point, which is kind of magical to watch, because, I think that we had of being in the age group, and even you as like a young teen had the kind of luxury of, or maybe privilege, or maybe the opposite thereof, of knowing what was going to happen in some way, shape, or form. Whereas for her, it was like, she was watching these movies, unfamiliar with the original trilogy. So like she knew that Anakin became Vader just from like living in my house, but she had no concept of anything else. And she knew who the Emperor was just from living in my house. But it was cool. It's cool to see that. I often tell people when they act, like, I don't know if you get the same thing, but like in my peers group who aren't really into this kind of stuff, whenever they go into this world, it's like I become this great guru to them, and they come and like ask me, like, so when Thanos snapped or whatever.
Right.
But like one of the things I often get asked is, what order should I watch these movies in? And unless you go with quote unquote like the machete order, like you're either going to spoil the Vader Luke or you're going to spoil the Palpatine Sidious. Like, one of those is going to get spoiled depending on which way you watch these movies, which is kind of like an unfortunate sort of side effect to it all. The other thing that I was going to mention was I'm hearing you talk, and you one of the things you said early on that I had a question about internally was that when I lived in Kentucky the first time.
Yes.
So that's a strange thing to hear. I'll just let you know from the outside in.
Right.
But so you lived in Kentucky twice. You've lived in Ohio. You lived in New Jersey at some point. I'm getting the impression of it now as well. You're doing a lot of moving around. Do you find at all that stuff like Star Wars or Pokemon or whatever these franchises that you kind of attached yourself to play any part psychologically in providing some sort of constant for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a way for me to find. It was a way for me to find my friend groups. It was a way for me to find people I wanted to hang out with. I mean, to be fair, I wasn't going to have friends in Ohio and New Jersey that want to go see Lord of the Rings with me. I wasn't going to have, it's just that nerdy culture that it helps me attach myself to a good group of friends every single time I moved, and it was I mean that's probably the main reason why.
That's pretty cool shit. You know what I mean? Like that
Right.
like in a kind of a turbulent you're becoming a man. You're moving around. You're at some level that lack of. And I'm not trying to judge your life, dude, or anything like that. But there,
Right.
at some base level, there's like this. There's an instability in some regard.
Right.
And the fact that some of these things that a lot of people that don't understand them will kind of pass off as meaningless, useless, trivial, whatever, provide this stability for people at a potentially trying time in their life.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty powerful stuff, I think. So let's get into episode 3. So what was your reaction seeing that?
I remember being absolutely blown away by the star battle scene at the fight scene at the front. That was probably at the time, one of the most beautifully CGI'd scenes I've ever seen in my entire life. And even still, watching it is incredible to see.
Gort, we hear that a lot. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Like that scene had a big impact on people.
There's a lot of things. It's, say, Yoda for episode 2 and that opener for episode 3.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was the first time, I mean, as a kid that watched Star Wars on VHS, was like, oh man, I want to see some huge,
right.
fights with Star Destroyers. And obviously with the technology at the time wasn't, with little models hanging on strings, you can't really do, super crazy stuff. But once the CGI got there and they started showing that they could do these fight scenes in space, it was like, this is like the stuff I've been wanting to see. The Jedi stuff's cool, the Sith stuff's cool, but seeing these huge, planet-sized, almost, moon-sized ships fighting each other is always so cool in my eyes.
You know what's funny is I think that the end space fight at Return of the Jedi was supposed to kind of be that. But as a kid, it never landed for me. It didn't. I watch it now, and I can kind of objectively say, wow, this is far greater than the space battle of Episode 4. But as a kid, it didn't seem like that big of a leap.
Right.
Whereas that Episode 3 space battle is it's a totally different ball game.
There's something too with a leap. When it's a trap and you have all the TIE interceptors and everything flying at you in Return of the Jedi. That's one of my favorite scenes of all time. And I feel like you get that in other movies. Episode 1 did it with droid fighters. Rogue One had a shot like that. And every time it's bigger, better. I'm like, it does kind of diminish, but it never takes away how I feel about that particular scene in Jedi.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you the space battle's awesome. Keep going.
Then we got into the Anakin drama with the Chancellor again. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably everybody's biggest critique of the prequels is the politics side of it is always going to be the stuff that drags the films down because they feel like it slows down the pacing of the film. But I actually kind of enjoyed that in episode 3 because you start to get little pieces of Anakin becoming more and more unhinged. The events in his life are lining up to the fact that he's going to have this crux moment where he just goes off the frickin' rails and does something terrible.
I would 100% agree.
I think a lot of people's objections with episode 3 are probably that the way they chose it with him killing young children probably was the wrong way to show that. But at the same time, you're having someone turn into the most crucial villains in Star Wars, in canon history. And, you're talking about the carry out of Order 66. Someone's got to kill the younglings. And it's probably the only other person that's there to do it is Anakin, now Darth Vader.
Well, and they've also just spent 5 hours over the course of 6 years to make this character endearing to you. And they have to find a way to tear him apart now. And I think it's one of those things where it's well, what better way to to make you question your love for this character than having him kill a bunch of kids.
Right.
I often wonder, I think about this all the time, but they kind of do it still in a relatively classy way where it's just the saber gets ignited and then that's it, right?
Right.
But in my head canon, there's a cut of that movie somewhere where where
that little kid's impaled by
so not too far, but the blade goes on and then you just see a whole bunch of those little stupid helmets go flying out of a door somewhere.
That would be hilarious.
All right. So keep going. I'm sorry to keep cutting you off.
Oh, you're fine. And then I think there's things, and so I guess the thing that I've just learned recently is that where the movies fail to address some things in the canon, I guess the novelizations of the movie are also considered canon. And I know one of the big things that people always debate is, did Dooku know that Chancellor Palpatine was Sidious? And in the movie, it appears not that case, but
correct. In
the novelization of the book, it's very clear that Sidious had told, Dooku that I am Chancellor Palpatine.
Gotcha.
So I guess there's a disconnect there, but that's different time. But I think for me, watching Anakin turn into Darth Vader was great. I think the battle between him and Obi-Wan was probably, outside of the Maul fight, probably one of my favorite emotional lightsaber fights of all time. And even after, going back after watching the Clone Wars series and watching that relation between Anakin and Obi-Wan get closer, and you understand how close they actually really were, watching that emotional toll of Obi-Wan realizing he has to kill his brother, basically, it carries a much heavier weight.
I agree.
And I think for someone who grew up loving the original trilogy, when they end the film with the Sons of Tatooine and them holding Luke Skywalker and all that stuff, that was a great way to ring. Okay, the next thing is, sequentially, it does a good job of saying, hey, episodes 3 through 6 are next. Episodes 4 through 6 are next.
Yeah.
So I think they ended it on a very good note of,
I agree.
Okay, go watch episodes 4 through 6 because we left on Tatooine. We're going to pick up on Tatooine.
And I also think that there was a charm to the conclusion of that movie where I remember watching it and then walking out of the theater, and all I could think to myself was, I have to watch episode 4 right away just to see how it feels. When Obi-Wan says the things that he says to Luke, how does that feel now? And it does change the dynamics of a lot of it.
Right. From a certain point of view.
I'll also say that I too agree with you. I love that battle between Obi-Wan and Anakin, and it does feel like I hear criticisms regarding this new trilogy that I want the lightsaber fights to be like that, and I don't. I want that to be the pinnacle lightsaber fight of all time. To never see anything that challenges that. These are two absolute masters of their craft going head to head, and that's why it's such a dance. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
and let's be honest, the Battle of the Heroes song in the background just makes it all the much better.
It's great. Yeah, dude, I'm super concerned about life in Star Wars without John Williams.
Oh yeah.
Because there's some stuff I like on Rogue One. There's one or two I like on Solo, but nothing hits the same way. You can't you can't capture that. I don't think they haven't yet anyway. So
I always get Danny Elfman.
Let's not do that. Let's not do that. The next thing you know, Helena Bottom Carter will sneak in there somewhere, and Tim Burton will be doing one. So let me ask you this. Not really ask you, rather, but say that to go off of your political backdrop. I agree with you, and I agree that a large amount of people have those criticisms, but I do like that it's kind of something different that defines that trilogy.
Right.
And I kind of, to be fair, I kind of miss it in the newer stuff. I kind of want to know what's going on in the political landscape. But it is it's something unique about it that in hindsight, that it's this is a cool little slice of life that we're not really privy to anywhere else.
I think going off of that, we could talk for days on the terrible things Last Jedi did, and the one cool thing that I think Last Jedi did was, when they had Benicio del Toro's character in that movie, he kind of introduces everybody to the shades of gray in the galaxy of, look, there's people that are going to sell weapons to the rebellion, there's people going to sell weapons to the First Order. Money runs the galaxy. And I think we started to get that a little bit more in The Last Jedi, but that's just, yeah. I agree that the political atmosphere of the prequels is something, because it's that slow buildup, that slow buildup from episode 1 to episode 3. And it's you get the big payoff in episode 3. And I think people don't feel like there's a slow buildup coming in the new trilogy. It's just everything's racing through the timeline. Okay, You get that feeling right now. I don't know. It's weird.
Well, I think but I think because it patterns itself closer to the original trilogy, and we can have that discussion. But in the same way that the original trilogy kind of races through it all and doesn't really stop to breathe, whereas the prequel trilogy does a lot of breathing. And I think there is something specific to your generation seeing Star Wars kind of cinematically rather in that age where it makes you view the sequel trilogy differently. And Gordon and I have actually talked about it at length about generational differences and how Star Wars is appreciated or seen or viewed or criticized due to those generational differences. So just from hearing your tone about Last Jedi, I'm anxious to get there because I don't think we see that movie the same way. But before we can get there, we have to dig into one of your bread and butter elements to how you see this franchise, and that is the Clone Wars. So I want to start with the film. How do you feel about that thing?
Again, it's another one of those things where when I saw the animated film, or
correct.
The animated film, and I don't know if I ever told Gort this, actually made me not want to watch the Clone Wars.
Same.
I thought it was awful. I didn't really enjoy it, and Gort actually had to be the one to convince me 5 years down the road to go actually watch the Clone Wars, and then he hears from me while we're playing the Old Republic. 2 weeks later, I was like, dude, I watched all 6 seasons in like a week and a half. I was like, what in the world? This was amazing. Well, but I think the movie aspect of it it was not that good.
Mike, did you see that movie in the theater?
No, I did not.
Okay,
I did.
And if you had a favorite part to that movie, what would it be?
None of them.
None of it. Okay.
I don't even remember it. I think it's like giving
disjointed.
It's like giving birth. It's like you wipe it away from your memory so that you can expose yourself to more of it later.
It's very much like elongated episodes, and they're pandering a lot in there. Probably the Zero the Hutt stuff is what I like best about it. It's just a ridiculous character, and I kind of liked a Hutt that could speak basic. I'll tell you, just something different.
It's the most turned off I've ever been to the franchise. Like walking out of that. Like I had to take
even
a break.
The Christmas special. Oh, you haven't watched the Christmas special?
Yeah, I haven't seen it. But
don't watch that.
But I have seen the Ewok movies. The
Ewok movies are better.
They are.
Yes. Both of them.
They're also better than Clone Wars, in my opinion. The movie. But I was super turned off by it, and I actually didn't watch Clone Wars, I think, until 2015. Because the animated series, and I think I was just rolling off the excitement of Force Awakens, where I finally was like, let me give it a shot. And when I watched that, I was like, oh my god, this is far better.
Makes you appreciate the prequels a little bit more after you watch the Clone Wars cartoon.
100%.
Oh yeah.
So let me ask you this before we get into the animated series: did you expose yourself to any of the novels or comics or anything else that was telling those stories during that time?
No, not really.
Okay. So Clone Wars is just a fresh, clean slate for you to kind of open your... Okay, that's cool. So before we get into that, I just want to tell you that a lot of that stuff is some of the better EU stuff that was ever done, both in Dark Horse and in the novels. Mm-hmm. But also that novelization of Revenge of the Sith, that was done by James Luceno. Am I right about that? Something like that, I think. And he did another book that was like, it's supposed to take place, it's like the Rogue One of Episode 3. Like it takes place like moments before Episode 3 starts.
Okay.
And it's fantastic. It's one of my favorites. But anyway, so you get into this show. Walk me through your thoughts, feelings, experiences regarding this.
I think it was... If there's one thing that I think the prequel movies didn't do a good job on, it was explaining the point of the clone troopers. Here's this random army that was built by, requested by Cypher DS and all this stuff. And then you finally start getting into a show where it's talking about, for the most part, the first season and the very first episode is talking about the life of the clones. And it's starting to portray, these clone troopers aren't just, clones. They actually have their own personalities. They care about themselves. They care about each other. And, you're starting to get this understanding of why the Clone Wars itself is such a dramatic era in the Star Wars story. I mean, you have the modern war going on right now, but it really resonates the fact that the Clone Wars is like this special moment in Star Wars. And for me, I really enjoyed seeing Anakin with an apprentice. I think it drives home the thought process of where Anakin felt sort of betrayed by the Jedi Order, but at the same time, they trusted him enough to have an apprentice at the same time. And it makes it even more emotional when he eventually does fall. And I think it increases the payoffs in the things that you see in the movies. That's just to me.
No, I agree.
I think there's some. I think what Gort and I joked about a lot when I was going through the season where it gets into the writer's strike and you start getting characters with ridiculous names like Savage Opress, and you're like, it's clearly just Savage Opress. I mean, but they got to make it sound fancy. Writer's strike. You can't come up with fancy names, but at the same time, that season gives me one of my favorite moments in Star Wars where Maul and Savage take on Sidious, and that's one of my favorite moments in that show.
Yeah, agreed.
And to me, watching Maul take over Death Watch was awesome. I think there were so many cool moving parts in that show that gave so much more backstory to characters you saw for 5 minutes of screen time in the movies, that it made their deaths in the movies much more impactful. Like when Plo Koon gets shot down in his speeder during episode 6, during Order 66, in his starship, and you spent this whole series with Master Plan. You're like, oh my God, this is actually kind of sad to see him die.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know what? Imagine if the Clone Wars series actually did take place chronologically, like we got all that before Episode 3 came out, and you had that entire series to watch. Then Order 66, that would be a lot different for us.
I know.
think.
Agreed. And I think like when you were saying about the clones and such, I think it does raise a lot of like interesting questions that it doesn't get credit for. And one of those questions is, what constitutes life? Because the clones of life weren't valued in the same way that sort of proper life, is valued. And it asks questions about that are far deeper than it kind of gets credit for, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I think you start to you see that in some of the episodes. I can't remember what it was, but there was they dealt with a deserter and the clones, and he started had a wife with a Twi'lek, or Twi'lek, how we pronounce that.
Right.
And it starts, his whole conversation with the other clone troopers in that episode is like, the Republic doesn't care about you. You're just a disposable asset to them. And I think it's very interesting to see how Anakin and Obi-Wan actually legitimately care for their clone trooper regiments. Like, they care about the troopers they're with. And then you see in the movies where the Jedi doesn't appear like they care about their clone trooper squads. And it's kind of fascinating to see that. And, that's the privilege you get with a 6, soon to be 7 season show, that build up.
I 100% agree. And I think that also like you said, like that, because I mean, theoretically, right? Like the proper way for the Jedi to view them in terms of their own sort of dogma and philosophy is to kind of view them as tools and implements. But it's actually, the villain of the saga that has more compassion for them.
Yep,
it's good shit.
That is probably one of my favorite moments of Star Wars. Is just that show.
Yeah.
That showed, and there's obviously it's like Seinfeld. There's episodes that are bad, and it's like, man, this episode sucks.
Sure.
I mean, but for the most part, that show just really, I really, really enjoyed it, and I think it was cool to see, and it's something you understand is happening in the movies, where Sidious is working in the background as Palpatine, getting things in motion, but actually seeing Sidious in the show, while he keeps the illusion of being Chancellor Palpatine, manipulating events in the background is also way more interesting to see.
I agree.
The one thing I wish we could see, and I know we probably never will, is we know somewhere in episode 1, Sidious kills Darth Plagueis, but it would be nice to see, that somehow appear. Give us because the Darth Plagueis book is now Legends, but
yeah, it was like one of the last ones before the cutoff.
Yeah.
So, What about? Let's jump ahead. How just to kind of keep it in the same pocket.
Yeah.
What is your thoughts and feelings surrounding this this last, like the last batch or the Bad Batch or whatever it is, and the other stuff that's coming forward from the Clone Wars story?
So Gort and I watched them on Star Wars' website when they came out, and that part of me was like, well, I'm sad that these never came out, because I think the stories are pretty cool. I think it was awesome how they were trying to find kyber crystals to power the Death Star. Understanding how Sidious is trying to get those, get the Death Star built, while also, the Jedi being completely clueless that something like this is being built, but they're starting to pick up the hints. And that, to me, that is. Oh wait, are you talking about the last episodes that actually released to Netflix, or is that the one we're talking about? I'm sorry.
I'm talking about I'm good with that too, but I was more so talking about the stuff that's coming on the channel.
Oh, okay, on Disney Plus.
Yes.
I'm excited. I really am.
Nice.
I think there are parts of the Clone Wars story probably didn't get to see. My initial hope is that when they end it, they end the series right before Order 66. Like, not before, Episode 3 starts. I want the show to go into Episode 3 and end with Order 66.
That would be.
Like,
cool.
I want to see the clone troopers following now Darth Vader to the temple, and how are they? How do they? The ruse that the clone troopers don't know that Darth Vader is Anakin Skywalker, and all they've been told is kill the Jedi, and keeping the ruse that understanding it. I want to see that play out. That's what I really want to see.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
So that pretty much takes us into the Disney era, right? Except you did get heavy into the games. I get the impression from listening to you.
Yeah, I did. I played the Force Unleashed games. Those were really fun. I really enjoyed those, and I really appreciate the Easter egg in Force Awakens with the base being called Starkiller Base, because Starkiller is probably one of my favorite Star Wars characters in video games. Just playing with him playing as him in the second one was Force Unleashed 2 was, but the first one was just awesome. But then, oh god, this is a funny story. My parents were super control freaks while I was in college.
You don't say.
Gord will know this. I had to sneak build a PC computer so that we could play the Old Republic when it came out, because I had a MacBook Pro, and since BioWare wasn't going to release the game to Mac, I had to sneak build a computer. So for 3 months, I was buying parts on Newegg and having them shipped to my friend's house.
That's
in
fantastic.
Lexington, and just built it when I came back. And yeah, but it worked out in the long run. So
that's a real Star Wars fan.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that's why I can't say I'm optimistically excited, because, the two guys that are going to be writing the Old Republic trilogy when it comes out are the same people that murdered Game of Thrones the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, we don't see that the same way either.
Yeah, but I am hopeful that characters like Revan and them actually become canon, because to me there are some great characters in the Old Republic Legends material that I really want to see become canon characters. If that makes sense.
All of them.
All of them, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that I would love to see most of that cast be canonized. Honestly, like Bastila and all those. And I mean, I even I think Darth Krea is one of the most interesting characters in Star Wars history. Honestly, but I don't think she's kind of viewed as such in the sort of corporate department. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Okay, so we have Force Awakens. Talk to me about that, the lead up, the viewing, etc.
So Gord will know that I was, when a new Star Wars trailer comes, like, oh my god, Star Wars, you're instantly jacked for Star Wars.
That dopamine drip.
But yeah, but you also realize too at the same time, and I think this is everybody's feeling, that knowing the second Disney got to write the Star Wars, you knew that Star Wars was going to become over commercialized. I mean, it's a product that they're going to try and make as much money as possible off of. And I think what made the prequel trilogies so special is they came so long after the original trilogy, and then the movies were 4 and 5 years apart. You know, there was a time skip where you knew, okay, I don't have my Star Wars binge. Oh my God, it's back 4 years later. So you know, we waited when did Revenge of the Sith came out? What was the year on that? It was 2000. So we had 10 years,
correct,
between that and Force Awakens. So it was a reasonable amount of time. Things I love. I mean, I loved some of the new characters they're building. I really do. I liked Hux more in Force Awakens. Hated him at the start and middle of the way through Last Jedi, and then kind of hoped he was going to shoot Kylo Ren at the end of Last Jedi. But he didn't. But I enjoyed the film. I did. I enjoyed several parts of the movie. It's like they gave you enough nostalgia to really buy into the new trilogy, if that makes sense. Like seeing the Millennium Falcon again, seeing Han, Chewie, all of them again.
I think you could make the argument they gave you maybe too much nostalgia.
Yeah.
To make it, so I mean, I hear what you're saying there for sure. But it's interesting because I kind of let's talk about let's skip Rogue One for now, and let's talk about Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, because obviously you feel differently about the two of those.
Yes.
So, and I get the impression from listening to you that you prefer Force Awakens over Last Jedi.
I'll say this: I like both films, and there's things I don't like about both films, if that makes sense. I think if I were to grade them together, I would say that the Force Awakens slightly edges out The Last Jedi.
Okay.
But it's not that, to me, The Last Jedi was an awful movie. There were just parts of it that I was like, really? You know, why?
Okay.
You know? But when it comes down to Force Awakens, I think J.J. Abrams maybe didn't take enough risks with the film to make it different. I do kind of agree with some people where they say it feels like it's a rehash of, you know, the Death Star and, you know, just trying to retell the same story.
Right.
But at the same time, you know, I can understand why he did it. I mean, he would be the ire of everybody if he changed the story too much.
Right.
And the trilogy wouldn't get the support it needs, so he kind of had to take a not so much risk when he made that movie. And when you look at The Last Jedi, I think Rian Johnson took a lot of risks, and you see the opposite spectrum where he took so many risks that things kind of made people really mad. And I think the one thing that really rubbed me the wrong way with The Last Jedi, just one giant plot hole, was why was Laura Dern's character hiding the plan from Poe and everybody, and we could have skipped the whole terrible casino scene. Like, that just, the casino scene just made zero sense to me in that movie. And to me, that probably felt like the most un-Star Wars scene that I've ever seen in any of the Star Wars movies, was that casino scene.
So I will say that I can't necessarily agree with the casino scene specifically, but I will agree to your point that I think that the Cano Bite sequence as a whole is probably the most mishandled thing.
Yeah.
Now, I will debate the idea of whether I think there is a plot hole in Last Jedi, and it's been pointed out to me, and now that I've seen it, I have a hard time dealing with it. I can explain it away, but I still see it. It's like when you get a stain on a shirt, and you use your Woolite and you use your special stain remover, and it's pretty much gone, but you know it's there. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's that sort of thing,
right.
Which I'll get to in a second. But I don't think it's a plot hole because it's made pretty clear early on that they don't trust Poe in a tactical sense.
Right.
So the fact that they would hide that information, because I don't think that Holdo was keeping it a secret. I think that she was. I think that she was hiding it, or you could say she's keeping it a secret specifically from him. You know, so he's operating not knowing that there is a plan in effect. And yes, I agree with you that ends up sending them on a mission that takes up a fair amount of space in that film for nothing. I do agree with you there. But I don't think it's necessarily a plot hole as much as it is. Dude, I think honestly they needed something for those characters to do, and they didn't know what to make them do. You know, but I do think I've said this 1,000 times, but the Cano Bite sequence, right? You have the horse race, you have the casino, and you have the prison break. And I don't think you need all three. Like I think you could have just gone and got the horses and left, or you could have just gone and got the guy and left, but you didn't need to do the whole shebang. So
now, I will say I did like Benicio del Toro's character in the film. Like, I thought that was an interesting way to introduce him, because I just like Benicio del Toro in general. I like him as an actor. I think he's a great actor.
I love him.
Which I'm hoping, for only having, 20 minutes of screen time in the film, that he somehow comes back in Rise of Skywalker. Like, I feel like you don't cast somebody like that and not have them come back. You know, it feels weird to me.
I do if all cards are being on the table. And I'm protective of Star Wars. Like, I only let my criticisms be known to personally to a few. But I hate the stutter. I hate it.
Oh, do you?
It drives me nuts. Like, I just don't. And I think one of the reasons why, like you, I'm a huge Benicio del Toro fan, and I think that dude just oozes cool. Like, he's he's one of those guys, like, you have to be careful walking around him because of how slick he is. Like, you might fall.
Right.
And I think that, like, giving him that stutter is, like, it seems so unnatural for him to have like this, like, huge communication disability, for lack of a better term. But yeah, so after seeing the first two films of this, where is your kind of thoughts, feelings, and everything regarding, you've been concerned that Disney's going to over commercialize this franchise, which of course they will do. At the same time, I think it's probably been over commercialized since Shadows of the Empire. But where is your excitement level? Because when I hear you talk about it, in passing, when you're talking about other things, perhaps like the Clone Wars that you're more passionate about, it sounds as though you're not really loving this new stuff. But then when you talk about the new stuff specifically, it seems like you're pretty happy with it. So I'm curious to hear where you're at with it.
I think there's story elements to the new movies that I like, and there's some things I don't like. I think when you look at the Clone Wars, the 2-3 year time jumps are nice because you get shows that can go on in between and fill in the gaps. I think there's completely wasted characters from the standpoint of the show. I think Captain Phasma is a completely wasted character. And I know there's probably more source material with her in the comics and other things that make her seem more appealing. But from a movie standpoint, it's a character that was hyped up so much, and then, and she gets thrown in a trash compactor, and then she falls in a exploding hole. So, I think going into Rise of Skywalker, I'm reasonably excited just because of the presence of Ian McDiarmid. I think, to me, that could potentially mean something great is coming in that movie. But at the same time, I hope it's not a complete and total, for lack of better terms, ass pull, where they pull a story out of nowhere. Because I think one of my main complaints of the new movies is this quick buildup of Rey's character and Kylo Ren's character, and now they're saying that the Knights of Ren are going to be in Rise of Skywalker, and we've only seen glimpses of them. So I'm starting to wonder now, is J.J. Abrams going to try and put too much into a 2.5-hour movie, and it's going to feel like, oh my God, here's all the stuff I wanted to show you in Episode 8 that I couldn't, and it's going to feel like here's everything I couldn't do in episode and put in Episode 9 type feeling. But I also realistically kind of have some faith in J.J. Abrams because I think he does do. I mean, let's be honest. I like J.J. Abrams' Star Trek work.
I do too. I do too. I know a lot of people are kind of super critical of the second one, but I even enjoy that one, to be honest. But I also say that as not being a huge Star Trek fan. I'm kind of like so he might have, honestly, he might have been making that movie for me. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
So yeah, I agree with you. I think that there is a lot of work to be done. But I also ask myself, did people feel this way when Episode 6 was coming out and had the Emperor in it that we had never seen before, and had no real explanation. And, and I don't really recall feeling this way in episode 3. I remember feeling like they had a lot of story left to tell in episode 3. Because he seems so, we saw him, murder a village.
Sand people.
Yeah, Gort and
the children too.
Yeah, I debated with someone as to whether or not it was genocide recently, so that's why I'm choosing my words carefully. But like, so we saw that, but that's kind of as close as we really got to really seeing like the full swing of the dark side in him. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, there's a lot of dark side to show in this movie coming up in order to make this believable. But he dispatches a room full of kids, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, yeah, I buy it. So I don't think it's impossible, but I do think there's a lot of work to be done with this last film. But I think there's probably a lot of work to be done in every last film. I feel like Return of the King had a lot of work to be done.
Right.
So you're. Let me ask you this, because I'm curious about this. Are you attached to any of these characters? Because that's one of the big struggles I have with this new trilogy is my attachment.
I would say that my attachments are to the wrong characters. I am still and always will be, and this is going to be for everybody, I guess, super attached to the idea of Luke, Han, and Leia being in Star Wars. That's the attachment that I have to the story. I know Gort here was like super sad when Adam Driver Kylo killed Han Solo, and he's to his perspective, I know he now thinks that Kylo Ren is an unredeemable character. He killed Han Solo. You can't be redeemed after you kill Han Solo, and obviously you don't know that Carrie Fisher is going to die shortly after the film comes out, after Last Jedi comes out. So it makes you wonder: did they kill after the fact? Hindsight 2020, they killed the wrong character in Last Jedi, because Mark Hamill is still alive and quite well. But
and this was 9 was supposed to be her movie,
right? And I think my attachments are to the old characters, not the new ones. Okay. And I think that's my problem. I'd say the only let's see here. Oh, I can't. I'm struggling on names right now, and it's because I'm thinking about work now.
let me roll a few past you. So the character that I'm most attached to is Kylo.
Okay.
And I think so. To be fair, I think that some of it is because he is kind of the only legacy character. Right. So I think that's a part of it. But I also just find his entire demeanor and character so unique in that franchise, where there's like this obvious turmoil, but at the same time, I ask myself, like, this is probably the best acted trilogy, overall, and it's probably the best shot trilogy overall. But like, I'm wondering, man, if I had an actor's director at the helm of episodes 1, 2, and 3, would I have felt differently?
Right.
I'm also attached to Rey, and I can't really explain why. I just find her character to be incredibly charming. And I think it's probably the actress herself that's coming through. But at the same token, I'm not really attached to Poe. I'm not attached to Finn. I'm not attached to Rose. I'm not attached to Maz or DJ. I'm right. I agree with you with some of your criticisms regarding Last Jedi. I agree that Last Jedi, for all the characters it makes far more interesting, I think it does a tremendous disservice to Hux. Like, I think he's far less interesting after that movie. And also with Phasma, I think that Phasma's part of this like long tradition of Star Wars where they hype a character up, they make it seem super cool, and then they kill it. And like you said, like, there might be stuff in books and comics, and trust me,
she has blaster-proof armor. Come on,
right. And I'm the type of guy that will go and read those books and comics, but I also recognize at the end of the day, who gives a shit? It only, you know what I mean? Like, it only really counts if it's in the movies, at some level. I can't put my finger on why that is, but there is something to that. Like, everything else is an afterthought. Even the cool stuff they've done with Maul, both in the Clone Wars and in Rebels, like, it doesn't really count somehow.
It's because the majority of the mass people are going to see the movies. They're not going to go watch and see and read the other source material. And I think I do agree where Hux's character was kind of destroyed in The Last Jedi. I think he went from being someone who seemed like, giving this speech on Starkiller Base and kind of seeming like an incarnation of, for all that it was, Hitler.
Right, definitely.
And all of a sudden, I'm a whiny little kid, and being choked around and saying, "Yes, Supreme Leader, I'll wash your shoes." That kind of is a complete 180 character reversal.
I can't remember if I heard this on a podcast or if Gordon and I were talking about it, but like that scene right before he gets thrown around, it is kind of funny to think about the fact that like all of it in The Force Awakens might have been this kind of facade. Like you're on top of your game, you're in charge, and then like the moment he knows he's messed up, he's like, "Yeah, look, everybody, you guys stay the course. I'm going to take this in my quarters."
I actually wonder if it's something different. So between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, you have the rise of the campiness Marvel movies that are run by Disney as well. And they
definitely
see how those movies are resonate with so many people, so they add some of the campiness into Star Wars, hoping it's going to catch.
100%.
It did not.
So we're talking about two different things,
Right.
But I 100% agree with you. You're talking about why it's there from a creation perspective, and,
right.
I'm talking about in universe. But yes,
right.
I 100% agree with you that the Marvel films don't exist. That sequence doesn't exist.
Right.
And I'll tell you what else doesn't exist is that Boulder taking out the wheelbarrow of the frog people.
Okay, I actually legitimately laughed at some of those, though. And I feel bad laughing at that because it's such facepalm laughing, it got me.
But there's nothing wrong with enjoying it. But the Marvel films that don't exist, that scene doesn't exist either.
It's just like the constant look of disappointment on those weird frog things. Like, what the hell? Come on.
Well, one of the biggest comedic elements from the movies were R2 and 3PO, who've been largely removed from these two. And that's where you're going to get it, is these silly moments or something
Agreed.
like Borgs.
Agreed.
Well, you heard why, don't you? I mean, J.J. Abrams was interviewed about why do 3PO and R2-D2 not have a big role. And he goes, because the second they show up, the opinions of the people watching the movie automatically swap to Han, Luke, and Leia. They swap to, where's Luke, where's Leia, where's Han? And
even with the introduction to BB-8, where he had comedic moments in The Force Awakens, Last Jedi, he's barely in it.
Agreed.
Well, he shoots coins at people in a prison.
I hate that too.
You want to know what? It's almost forgetable. And the next thing he does is get under a trash can.
There's nothing quite like the lighter thumbs up scene in
but that seems like Star Wars humor to me. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
That seems appropriate.
Right.
The thing with the that I would argue with JJ is that in the scene in Attack of the Clones, I mean, even as campy as that is with R2 and 3PO in the droid factory, I never for a moment missed Han, Luke, and Leia. You know what I mean?
Right.
It seemed natural for them to exist in that world, regardless of who was beside them.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, it's a nightmare.
You may not recognize me with this red arm.
People feel a way about that. I like that too. Like
I know.
I always there's certain things in my life that I've come across where I'm like, God, I wish I didn't like this because it would make my life easier. And that's one of them. When people start getting on that, I'm like, dude, I think that's cool. And Batman vs Superman, the uncut version, is another one that I find myself like, oh God, why did this have to come up? Okay, let me crack my knuckles and get into this conversation. But I think that that the droids are something that should be in that movie more often. And if they were in it, you'd get a lot less of the kind of Marvel style humor.
Right.
And I forget what kind of. Snoke. I was attached to Snoke as well. I didn't care about him one iota in 7, but his 2 sequences in 8, I was like, this character, and it might be Andy Serkis. I could watch that dude. I mean, I've watched him. I've watched him play a gorilla. I just get on board.
Yeah, I know, right?
There's something about that dude where I can just watch him do anything.
Yeah.
But yeah. So let's talk about the spinoff films. Let's talk about Rogue One first. What are your thoughts surrounding that?
So I'm going to say something kind of controversial, and this might make Gort kind of mad. I know he's not a big Rogue One fan. I will argue from the standpoint that I feel like some of the story elements of the spin-off films feel more like Star Wars than the new trilogy movies do.
Oh,
I won't argue that. I won't argue that. Wait, let me make sure. You said feel more like Star Wars. Period.
Some aspects of those films feel a little bit more like Star Wars than some of the things that go on in the new trilogy films.
So I will say this. I think that Rogue One and Solo feel much closer to the original trilogy.
Yes.
Okay, so see, that I agree with.
Yeah.
I think the prequels have changed the dynamics of what Star Wars is. So in that sense, like if the prequels can feel like Star Wars and be so far left, I feel like the sequel trilogy finds its way somewhere between the two quite comfortably. But I do feel like Rogue One specifically, it feels like what watching Star Wars 77. Oh, hold on. Watching Star Wars 77, what that felt like to me as a kid, Rogue One feels like to me as an adult. I don't know how else to describe it. Like the same impact of seeing Darth Vader walk through a room after stormtroopers have killed a bunch of rebels. Like when I'm 5 years old watching that for the first time in '84 or whatever, when the first time I saw it, that seemed just as serious as Darth Vader killing all those people in the hallway as a 30-some-year-old.
I will say that for all the things that Rogue One did right or wrong, that might be one of my favorite Darth Vader scenes of all time.
Oh, yeah.
Just that sequence at the end where he's just slicing down rebels as he moves throughout the ship that is probably just one of the coolest Vader sequences I've seen in a long time.
yeah. That's one of the most right things in that movie.
Well, my favorite moment of that sequence is right before the slicing starts, when there's just a close-up shot of one of the rebels. I've said this 1,000 times, but one of the rebels' faces. Because it's that face of I bet you this is him. Like, because this would
like
be
the absolute terror.
Yeah, because like this would be a character like in universe that you would have heard legends of but never actually seen. You know,
I mean, he's fresh off of literally killing the last of the Jedi, like killing off the last remnants of the Jedi Order.
And like this would be kind of almost a celebrity, like a war celebrity,
right?
You know, but of the opposite, side. Unfortunately for you, but it's that moment, it's that realization in his face of, oh my God, I bet you this is him. You know, like this is the guy I've heard stories of. It's a little beat, but I love it.
I did think it was also cool that Vader had a fortress on. Oh God. What is Mustafar? And I think the whole premise of when you look at the idea of Sith being, having a place where you literally were almost killed and defeated be your, area where you're going to sit there and, heal on your back to tank. And, I think that premise is really cool from looking at from a Sith standpoint because it feeds the anger and,
I never thought about that.
Angerness and thirst of the dark side. But,
that's true.
I thought that was very interesting to have that on Mustafar.
Ironically to me, the part that Gort struggles with the most, I'm talking about him like he's not sitting right here, but it is the Jedha sequence is my favorite sequence. Like Saw's faction to me seems super cool. And just the idea that there's like these fanatical types within the rebellion, that it's once again just like DJ exposes, like it's not just black and white, like there are these vast shades of gray that we haven't been exposed to. I love stuff like that. It's world building that I'm attracted to within Star Wars.
I gotta say something about the whole Jedha scene too, and especially Saw Gerrera's people. Every appearance that they've had outside of that movie I love, and there's nothing about them in that movie that I don't like. It has nothing to do with them. Just the sequence on Jedha is very dragged out to me. Like it just feels like a funny pace to it. Something feels off to me. It's hard for me to describe. But I would love to see just more of them.
I was going to say before you started, I was like, dude, if you bash two tubes, I'm ending this show.
Oh no!
I think what's really probably my favorite character from Rogue One, and it's not Jyn. I think it might be Cassian. I think him sitting there telling, because his whole story is, he's been fighting the Empire his entire life since he was 6 years old or something, and I think that's a good point to show Jin, who, she worked with Saul. She was with Saul's group. Her mother was killed by Krennic's,
Yep.
troopers, But I think it's a good perspective to show people who really, young kids who may not have seen the original trilogy just getting to Star Wars saying, hey, the Empire is this horrible, awful thing, and I've been fighting them since I was 6 years old, and I would do anything to see the Empire fall. Well, I think from that perspective, his character was very interesting.
I agree, and I also love the fact that he's like part of this like Black Ops, organization that does the stuff the rebels don't want to dirty their hands in publicly, for lack of a better term.
And something that you're talking about there too, watching the Empire, getting to see them in this very villainous way. You don't get that so much in the other movies. They're the bad guys. You kind of see them do bad things, but not in the same way.
I agree.
It's another strong point for Rogue One. I could argue a lot of good points for that movie. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean I don't see things. Right. Like I do look at it objectively too.
Yeah, the seeing a city and what it means to be under Imperial occupation, that's a different vibe.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you don't really see that anywhere else. Like you
and let's be honest, it was cool just to see a Star Destroyer just sitting there under occupation with Star Destroyer. That was aesthetically pleasing. That was very cool to see.
It is. And you know what? Getting to see that, a situation where the stormtroopers and the Empire, it's like an element of terror, but the opposite almost on Corellia in Solo. You see them as more of a positive thing because they have that message going on. Join the Empire.
Yeah,
well,
it's the propaganda.
That's like telling the perspective that I guess people that worked within the Empire themselves, like the everyday soldier or commoner for that enlisted in the Empire, doesn't know the Empire is some awful evil machine.
Yeah,
they don't get that aspect. And that's,
you wouldn't necessarily.
That's why when Han Solo's character in Solo says, when the guy, his lieutenant tells me, we're trying to bring a stable, peaceful planet in the Empire, and he goes, aren't we the ones invading this planet? Like he's automatically starting to question, hey, we're the bad guys here, not the people we're fighting. We invaded them,
Well, and let's not also forget that he also said, I'm going to be a driver, a flyer.
Right.
I'm just kidding. Before we transition into Solo, there was a point that I wanted to touch on with the I'm not a super political person. It's not really my bag.
Mm-hmm.
As long as my tax refund is good at the end of the year, then I'm okay with just kind of burying my head in the sand the other 364 days.
If you're not my friend, you're my enemy. You know that.
but that being said, I know I'm aware of things, right? So like there is something interesting to me about marking points in time with these movies. For instance, the 77 movie coming off of the back of Vietnam and having, political undertones of that within it, right? And then the prequel trilogy.
Oh, they fight the whole third movie in a jungle. I mean, come on.
Exactly. The prequel trilogy coming off of the 9/11 era that happened in the middle of that, and everything that kind of came as a result of that, like that's not lost on me. And then also, there's elements of that Jedi sequence where I see Syria in that sequence, and it's not that I need that, and it's not that I can't disassociate and just view the movie without thinking about that, but there is something about it in hindsight and in retrospect, going back and being like, dude, this is also marking a point in time. Almost like South Park in a way, like not to make like the strangest comparison, but to me, watching South Park is almost like going in a time machine because you're like, oh yeah, I forgot this was going on and this was going on, and Rogue One kind of has that for me as well. Moving into Solo, let's talk about that. Thoughts, comments, courtesies, concerns.
I like a good heist movie. I mean, it may or may not be like my favorite Star Wars film of all time, but Gordon and I've talked about this. I think who was the actor that played Han Solo? I feel like he did a better job. I feel like he did a better job trying to make the character his own than Lando.
Okay,
I think,
so let me interject. I'm sorry, but this is much like my experience with Batman vs Superman, and the other. I feel the exact same way as you. I think that that guy added an interesting element and brought something new to that character, where I feel like the Lando thing is more of an impersonation.
Right.
So I just want to let you know that you were
in relation to Batman vs Superman. Who are you relating that to?
Just in the things that I wish I didn't like because I feel the need to say it all the time when people are saying the opposite.
Okay.
So I agree with you. I just wanted to let you know that you're operating in a safe space regarding that you have allies here.
I think Donald Glover did not do enough to make Lando his own character.
I
That
agree.
was just.
I agree.
But I think, but I like a good heist movie. I really do. I think this trying to pan out the story behind the Kessel Run is great. Them playing to the joke behind the Kessel Run in the distance is always going to be amusing to me because that is always going to be a laughing point of Star Wars, and I love that was embraced in the movie.
I agree.
It's a very Han Solo thing to do too.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
And I'm going to be honest, I always love Woody Harrelson. I can watch any movie with Woody Harrelson and enjoy it. That's just my honest opinion.
Agreed. He's great. What's your favorite moment of that movie?
I 100% love the double blind at the end where they pull the con at the end and fool both Woody Harrelson and Beckett. I thought, they fool Beckett, and then who's Paul Bettany's character? I can't remember his name.
Voss. Is it Voss?
Yeah.
Dryden Voss.
Dryden Voss. That's probably my favorite part of the scene is the double blind right there where they fool everybody.
Yeah.
Where they think the coaxium's fake and it's actually real. And that just... To me, that feels like a Han Solo moment for some reason. It just does.
I agree. I like
on that
too.
name, by the way. I almost blurted out Quinlan Voss.
I almost did too.
My mind went blur.
I like my favorite sequence, and it preys on my nostalgia, obviously. But it's when Chewie sits next to him in the Falcon for the first time as like a co-pilot. Like, there's something about that where I'm like holding back tears every time I see it. You know, I'm not crazy about that movie. I kind of like it for what it is and can enjoy it, but that moment hits me like a ton of bricks in my chest every time.
So do you like it when they eject the escape pod and it actually looks like the Falcon after that? Then like they get rid of that little escape pod.
Yeah, I like that as well. But it's not the same moment. Like you know, when he sits down and it's like this is it. This is where they become a team. Like that's a big moment for me.
You know what? They eject that escape pod, but he flies that ship one time and just trashes it. It immediately looks exactly like the ship we know.
I think, so my question to you then is, if that is a moment that you really liked in Solo, how did you feel when Rey sat next to Chewie in the Millennium Falcon at the end of Force Awakens?
So here's the thing with my like, I can get into the woods on this. And I'm up on spoilers. So it's seeming to me that, and at the risk of being, I won't spoil anything. But it is becoming more apparent that they may have shot a couple of ways to end 9. There may be a couple different endings to that movie, and then they were testing it and seeing which one they wanted to go with.
Right.
It's also seeming like one of those tests was that she was going to be a Solo.
Okay.
And I don't think that's the way they're going to go, honestly, at this point anymore. But I think it's the logical way to go. And if they did go that way, stuff like her sitting next to Chewie in the cockpit feels entirely different to me.
And being able to understand Chewbacca, which historically only few people in the galaxy can even understand the Wookiees.
Instinctively knows her way around the Falcon. You know, a lot of stuff to that. So let's talk about how you feel about Rebels.
I actually have not gotten to watch that much of Rebels.
Okay.
So historically wise, this is the point in my life where my teaching career kind of starts. So my time to watch TV shows has diminished, and I've watched parts of it. I've watched probably, I don't know how this worked. I ended up watching probably the last 2 seasons and really didn't watch the earlier stuff. So I'm up on the stuff with Maul and Ezra and Obi-Wan finally killing Maul. Like I'm up on. Oh wait, I'm not. That's Rebels, right? That is Rebels.
Yeah.
And so I'm up on that point when Ahsoka comes back, and so I'm up to date on all that stuff.
Okay.
I think from when I first started watching that show, because I remember watching the first season, I wasn't that interested. I think that show struggled the first few seasons.
I agree.
I think it's because when you look at it in juxtaposition to the Clone Wars cartoon show, you're watching the Clone Wars with characters you already know. They're
Correct.
established. You already bought into Anakin. You're bought into Obi-Wan. You're bought into the Jedi and the Clone Wars.
And you're familiar with you're familiar with the world as well.
Right. And now you're trying to build something new with characters you don't know under the assumption that Vader has already killed most of the Jedi, but here we go. We have a Jedi, not a full Jedi Knight, and then taking on Ezra as an apprentice. And it just seems, I mean, it's not like that doesn't bother me. I mean, obviously Vader can't kill all the Jedi and, you know, all that stuff. But, you know, just it's hard. It's a hard buy-in for me right at the start.
I got you.
Because to me, and it goes back to your talk about earlier, I grew up watching the original Star Wars films as a kid, but the first true iteration I have with Star Wars on the big screen is the prequel trilogy and the re-release of the other movies and putting a beak on the Sarlacc pit, which was weird.
Right. Did you see, because you said seasons 3 and 4, and I agree with you that I don't think that show got its footing until halfway through the second season.
Right.
But I feel the same way about Clone Wars. And I might move Clone Wars to season 3 before it actually really settles in. But did you see the scene where Vader and Ahsoka fight? Because that's at the end.
Yes.
Okay. So to me, from that point forward, is the meat of that series. So
that
I would
was
say
an emotional pull
100%.
that I was actually kind of not ready for when she slices open Vader's mask and you can see Anakin's face and you're
Yep.
like, oh my God. Okay,
Yep.
so she gets the understanding even before anybody else does that Anakin is still in there somewhere.
Yep.
Like, Vader has not completely won over Anakin just yet.
100%.
And I think that's I think what they may have ended up doing, this is going to sound weird. The reason why they introduce things like that and they introduce Thrawn into the shows because it's going to get older Star Wars fans that know things back into the show. And I think it's a very good, because it's well established that there's always that conflict between Vader and Anakin and who wins at the final battle at the end. And we know that George Lucas has always stated that Star Wars is the story of Anakin Skywalker.
Right.
So, and that I wonder how that's going to play out in Episode 9, because are they still following George Lucas's vision where the story of Star Wars is Anakin Skywalker? It's
Right.
not Luke, it's not Han, it's not Leia, it's the story of Anakin.
Right.
So, how does Anakin's story end in Episode 9? I mean, well, it's just I don't know. I'm all over the place with thoughts on this.
No, I hear you there. But yeah, I would say you're probably good on. I mean, you can watch the other stuff from Rebels if you'd like. You know, there's no harm, but I think you have the kind of the real essence of it under your belt. So, speaking of Episode 9, where is your excitement level? What are your thoughts, kind of leading up into that?
Okay, so I try to steer away from spoilers as much as possible because it's just the way I am. Whenever Ian McDiarmid is close to Star Wars, I'm excited. That, to me, he is just one of those classic Star Wars actors. Palpatine and Sidious, I mean, if you believe now that Legends is gone, Sidious is one of the most powerful Force beings in the history of Star Wars, one of them.
Right.
And so hearing that Sidious cackle, you automatically start to think was, you know, if Luke could Force project himself, is it possible Sidious didn't die? And was he Force projecting himself into Snoke? Like, you know, what is the story that's being told with Ian McDiarmid coming back? Why are they showing remnants of the Death Star sitting in an ocean after it's been destroyed? You know,
right.
What is the story point they're going to try and tell with Episode 9? I think what would disappoint me the most is if Rey is a descendant of Sidious. That would probably disappoint me the most, because to me that seems like it's the most obvious thing they could do, and if they're going to go the most obvious route, that just disappoints me for some reason.
So, as we close up the shows, we like to do a couple little kind of rapid fire type questions. Gort, do you have any?
Yes, I do.
Why don't you start, and I'll come behind you, so to speak.
I'm just gonna leave that one where it is.
Like it's a very competitive sport, that sort of talk around here. So we our so to speak is like the disclaimer right after. My wife is terrible at it. Like, oh my god, dude. Like we'll be sitting at the dinner table. She'll say the worst things ever. Like she'll something good. We're gonna have something like a tasty pasta or something for dinner, and she'll be like, I can't wait to get that in my mouth. And I'll just look at her. I'm like, you gonna so to speak that or what? Anyway, go ahead, Gord.
All right, so I'm going to start with my classic here. What is your favorite lightsaber color?
Oh, well, that's going to be one that's going to be purple because Mace Windu is awesome.
Good choice. That's my favorite as well.
Yeah.
If you had to destroy a ship because you just don't like it, what would it be? Like, destroy it from being in Star Wars ever.
Oh, God. Shoot. Rebel U-Wing. Don't like it.
Interesting.
Don't like it. I'm happy it got destroyed.
Okay. What is the worst moment in The Empire Strikes Back?
Ooh.
In The Empire Strikes Back? Oh, God.
Good question.
Where Leia kisses her brother?
That's a good answer.
What is the best moment in the Clone Wars?
Oh, in the TV show The Clone Wars?
Yes.
Oh, boy. Oh, God. You're making me choose just one. You're evil. I really like the Camino sequence where the troopers are fighting to protect their home, where they're being made.
Okay, that's season 3, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How many Jawas does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop?
The world will never know.
That's fair.
That is fair.
I was expecting Utani. What would a Sith Lord make with an easy bake oven?
Oh, you're an asshole.
I know.
Brownies. Because screw you. That's what I got made fun of for.
Easy bake oven's is a long. I had to do it. It's an ongoing joke. What is the best Lego set? Best Star Wars Lego set.
Oh God, the incomplete Death Star. That is the best one, and it's the one I want the most. But it's like $5,000 on eBay. That is the best one. They do not make Ultimate Collector sets like they used to. That one is so cool.
And we might know a couple people with that.
That's true. Is that it?
All right, what do you got?
All right. Who is your favorite Jedi?
Favorite Jedi? Well, I'm just going to go with Anakin because he's still my favorite.
So let me ask, it might be the same answer. Favorite Sith Lord?
Favorite Sith Lord? Oh, it's got to be Sidious. Okay. I love Sidious. I love the subvert way he fooled the entire Republic. I love it.
Yeah. Favorite Jedi duel or lightsaber duel, I should say.
Oh, that. Well, God, does it have to? Can it be Anakin Obi-Wan? Like that's going to be
certainly.
That's my favorite. Yeah, that fight in Episode 3 is going to be my favorite forever. It just is.
Favorite non-Force user.
Favorite non-Force user. Chewbacca.
I like that answer. I'm going to ask this question, and I'm wording it a very specific way.
Okay.
Gort and I are kind of in agreement that there's enough kind of negative nonsense out there regarding this franchise, and a fair amount of it unearned. So we're everything that we try to do Star Wars content wise, positivity is important in how we approach it. With that being said, what is your least favorite Star Wars film?
Least favorite Star Wars film? Oh, probably Attack of the Clones.
And your favorite?
Favorite? It's Revenge of the Sith.
I'm not mad.
It's probably my favorite.
I'm not mad at that.
Yeah.
And with that, I think that is everything. Gord, do you have anything else that you want to add before we get out of here?
No, that's it.
Real quick, this is a open kind of forum, so if anybody listening wants to be a guest, it's as simple as contacting us and letting us know. We should set up a email, but for the time being, you can email nerdrageradio@gmail.com. Or you can PM, actually that might even be preferred, PM the Force Sensitive Facebook page, and we'll add you to the list. Anybody supporting the Nerd Rage Patreon obviously gets preferential treatment and is moved to the top of the list as quickly as possible. That being said, I think that'll do it, and we haven't had an outro picked yet. So anything you'd like to say to close out, Michael?
If any of you are, this is just going to be me here. Obviously, I like the prequel films, and I'll probably get criticized for somewhat liking Hayden Christensen playing Anakin. Go back and just think about how the Jedi are taught to be peaceful and non-emotional, and then again look at how Hayden Christensen plays that Anakin character, about how his main complaint is always he's non-emotional. He doesn't show any emotion on his face, and then watch when he actually explodes into Vader, and watch how awesome he actually becomes when he divulges into Vader and all the emotions finally come out. It's like turning a dripping faucet on full blast. So, I mean, that gave me a new appreciation for Hayden when I kind of thought about it that way.
I like that. I like that a lot. All right. Till next time. It'll be probably 2 weeks before the next episode. Take care.